For 9 nights, a widowed father slept sitting up in the front seat of a rusted Corolla, so his 2 children could stretch out flat under every blanket he owned. He did not go to a shelter. He did not phone his sister a second time. He did not tell a single person at the care home where he changed bedsheets and spooned supper into people who could no longer feed themselves. On the 10th night, in the kind of cold that makes the snow squeak like styrofoam under your boots, a stranger tapped twice on his frozen window, and what that stranger wanted was not what anyone inside that car was braced for. Ruben Mensah was 43 years old. He worked as a personal support worker at Riverwood Place, a long-term care home off Portage Avenue in Winnipeg, and he was good at it in the way that doesn't show up on a pay stub. He clocked in at 6:45, and for the next 8 hours he lifted bodies heavier than his own, turned them so their skin wouldn't break down, wiped chins, warmed lotion between his palms before he touched anyone's hands, because cold hands frightened the residents. He earned $18.40 an hour. There were no benefits worth the name, no overtime he was ever offered, and no sick days he could afford to use. Mrs. Iverson, 91, called him the Gentle One and never remembered his name from one morning to the next, and Ruben answered to it anyway. Every day, with the same patience, because she was somebody's mother, and somebody had stopped coming to visit. He had 2 children. Imani was 11, and she was the kind of girl who watched everything and said almost nothing about what she saw. She noticed when her father pushed his portion onto her plate and said he'd eaten at work. She noticed the way his jaw set when he opened the mail. She had learned, the way some children learn far too early, that being quiet was a way of helping. Joel was 5. Joel laughed at the sound of his own hiccups. He cried hard and forgot why within a minute. He believed his father could fix anything, which was, for the time being, exactly what Ruben needed him to believe. Their mother, Adeze, had died 22 months earlier. It was not a long illness, and it was not a kind one. One February she was tired all the time, and by the next she was gone, and in between there were appointments and waiting rooms, and a hospital parkade where Ruben had sat with his forehead on the steering wheel more times than he could count. Manitoba covered the surgeries and the hospital beds. It did not cover the months he cut his hours to be with her, or the prescriptions that weren't on the formulary, or the simple arithmetic of a household that had always needed 2 incomes, and now had 1.5, then 1. People assume grief is the hardest part. Grief is hard, but grief at least has a shape. What broke Ruben more quietly was the spreadsheet, the way the numbers stopped working, and never started again. He did not waste energy being angry at the world for taking her. Anger was a luxury, like a second income, like a full tank of gas, like a day off. He simply got up every morning and did the next thing, and then the next, and after a while that was just how he walked through his life. With a limp nobody could see. The building he rented in was sold in the fall. The new owners sent a letter that used a polite word: renovation, for what everyone in the North End knew it really was. He had until the end of December. He looked at every listing he could find. A 2-bedroom anywhere safe for his kids ran $1,700 a month now, and the new places wanted first and last, and a credit check that would not be kind to a man who'd missed payments the year his wife was dying. He called the housing wait lists. He was told 9 months, 14 months, we'll add you to the list. He had $410 in his account and a job that paid every 2 weeks and never quite reached the end of the month. On the last day of December, he packed what would fit into a 2008 Corolla with 290,000 kilometers on it, and a heater that worked if you talked to it nicely. He folded the back seats down. He laid out the comforter from his own bed, the one that still, if he was honest, smelled faintly of a daze. 2 backpacks, a grocery bag of granola bars and apple juice, and the off-brand crackers Joel liked. 3 changes of clothes each. a jug of windshield washer fluid, because in a Winnipeg January, that mattered as much as food. That car became their home. He still showed up to work. He washed his scrubs in the sink of a Tim Hortons washroom and dried them under the hand blower until his arms ached. And he put on his name tag and walked into Riverwood Place, smelling of the same lavender lotion he rubbed into Mr. Dubois' knuckles every morning. And not one person there knew that the man straightening their pillows had spent the night in a parking lot watching his own breath freeze on the inside of the glass. He ran the car like a system. Amani took the front passenger seat once Joel was asleep. Joel slept in the back, cocooned. Reuben slept last, always last. After he'd checked the doors and watched the lot and counted his children's breathing in the dark. They think it's an adventure, he told himself the first night, staring at the orange wash of a streetlight through the windshield. They think we're camping indoors outdoors. He held that thought the way you hold a railing on black ice. As long as they believed it, he hadn't failed them yet. The first night was almost manageable. He parked behind a strip mall on McPhillips, engine off, and the heat was gone within minutes. Joel was thrilled by the novelty. Imani didn't ask a single question. She just looked at the way her father had arranged the blankets and said, "This is a good spot, Dad." In a voice that told him she knew exactly what kind of spot it was, and was choosing to let him keep his story. 11 years old, already fluent in the language of things you don't say out loud. The second night was -26. At 2 a.m, Joel woke up crying. Not the cry that wants attention, but the cry that means the cold has reached the bone. Reuben took off his parka, the only good coat he owned, a Navy Canadian tire special he'd had for 6 winters, and he wrapped his son in it until the boy looked like a blue caterpillar, and the crying stopped, and Reuben sat in the driver's seat in 2 thin shirts and shook until his teeth hurt. He did not take the parka back. In the morning, Amani said, "Where's your coat?" And he said, "Too warm in here for it." And she looked at him for a long second and decided, the way she decided 100 small things now, not to call it a lie. The fourth night, a security guard rapped on the glass and told him the lot was private and he'd have to move along. The man wasn't cruel. He glanced into the back seat and something crossed his face. Reuben watched him see the kids, but the rules were the rules, and Reuben started the engine and pulled out slowly, the way you drive when everything you love is asleep in the car, and one hard break might wake the whole fragile thing up. He found a church lot off Selkirk Avenue with a hand-painted sign that read "Everyone Welcome," and he hoped that included people who had nowhere else to be at 3 a.m. On the 7th night, the cold did something he'd been dreading. The car wouldn't start. The battery, old and frozen, gave him a single tired groan and then nothing. He sat there with his hands on the wheel and his children asleep behind him, and the temperature outside the door reading -31 on his cracked phone. He got out. He lifted the hood as if looking would help. Then Amani's door opened and she stood beside him in her toque and his old work gloves, holding the phone flashlight steady on the engine without being asked, her breath coming out in white clouds, not saying anything, because some things are too cold and too heavy for words. A man 2 cars down, a stranger leaving a night shift, saw them, dug a booster cable out of his trunk, and gave them a boost without a single question. And Reuben said thank you in a voice that nearly came apart, and the man just nodded and said, "Cold one tonight, eh?" and drove off, and Reuben never learned his name. He thought about that man for a long time afterward, how little it had cost him, how much it had been. By the 9th night, the math had run out of answers. He had $11 until payday, $11 and a quarter tank, and a choice he sat with in the parking lot of a co-op for 6 full minutes. If he idled the car for heat, the gas was gone by morning and he couldn't get to work. If he didn't idle it, his children spent the night at -30 with no engine and a dead-tired battery. If he spent the $11 on gas, there was nothing for the milk Joel drank. or the bread that made their suppers. There was no version of the equation where everyone got what they needed. He bought the gas. He kept the heat low and the children warm, and he went without supper, and he made 3 phone calls while they slept. Main Street project. Full, no family beds. A family shelter in the West End, wait list. Weeks, they took his name. A 3rd number gave him a 4th number and wished him luck. He did not say the true thing to any of them, which was that he was terrified. Not of the cold, but of someone deciding his children would be safer somewhere that wasn't with him. Child and Family Services was a phrase that lived in his chest like a swallowed stone. Losing his kids was the one outcome he knew he would not survive. Then he called his sister. Florence answered a 5th ring, her voice thick with sleep. He hadn't meant to ask. He'd promised himself the last time that he wouldn't ask again. But the words came out of him low and ashamed. Flo. I don't have anywhere to take them. And there was a silence on the line that told him the answer before she said it. She was in a 1-bedroom in Transcona. She was behind on her own rent. She loved him. She did not have the room. It wasn't cruelty. It was one person treading water, telling another that she couldn't carry him without going under herself. He said he understood. He said he'd figure it out. He hung up, and for the first time in 9 nights, Reuben cried. But he couldn't make a sound, because Imani slept lightly, and if she woke and saw him, she would know the camping story was finished. So he cried through his breathing, long and slow and silent, his hands locked on the wheel, his jaw clenched until it ached. And after 11 minutes he stopped, and wiped his face on his sleeve, and checked the doors, and counted the breathing, and waited for a sky that took a very long time to turn gray. He didn't know that 14 hours later someone would knock on his window. He only knew what he'd known for 9 nights, that he was on his own, that the system had no room in it for a man who'd done everything he was supposed to, and that in the morning he would wash his scrubs in a coffee shop sink and clip on his name tag and go take care of other people's mothers, because that was the kind of man he was. He showed up. Even when nobody showed up for him. 800 kilometers west of that church lot, in a glass-walled office on the top floor of a building she owned outright in downtown Calgary, a woman named Beatrice Lindqvist sat at a desk that cost more than Reuben's car and felt almost nothing at all. She was 58. She had built Lindqvist Building Supply from a single hardware counter in Brandon, Manitoba, into a chain of 31 stores across the prairies, and along the way she'd bought into property, strip malls, warehouses, and more recently, a handful of affordable housing developments that looked good in the annual report, and let her investors feel they were doing some good while still clearing their percentage. Her face had been in Canadian business. She knew the premier by his first name, and none of it had meant a thing to her in 2.5 years. Beatrice had grown up the daughter of a woman who cleaned other people's houses in Brandon, and never once let her daughter see her cry. There had been a winter, when Beatrice was 12, when the rent and the heating bill could not both be paid, and her mother had driven them to a relative's farmyard, and they had slept 3 weeks in the cab of a half-ton truck with a tarp over the box, and the engine running in short rationed bursts. Her mother braided her hair in the front seat every morning and told her not to tell a soul. Beatrice never forgot the smell of that cab, vinyl and cold, and her mother's drugstore perfume. She built her whole life on top of that memory, the way you pour a slab over a crack, cover it, build on it, never go back. What cracked the slab was Rosalind. Rosalind Lindqvist had been 29, a community health nurse in Winnipeg, the kind of person who couldn't walk past someone hurting without stopping. She spent her weekends at a downtown resource center, reading to kids, helping mothers fill out forms, braiding little girls' hair the way Beatrice's mother had braided hers in that truck. "Mom," she'd said once, sitting in Beatrice's office with her boots up on the glass desk, "you know what I love about this work? You get to be with somebody on the worst day of their life. Not fix it, just be there. She died on a Wednesday on an icy stretch of the Trans-Canada, a transport truck, black ice, nothing that anyone could have done. Beatrice funded a family resource center in her name in Winnipeg's core. She approved the design and the gold, lettering over the door, and the budget and the staffing. In 2.5 years, she had never once walked inside, because every mother in that building would have Rosalind's tired kindness in her face. And Beatrice could not look at that. The only person who saw through her was the man who drove her car. Walter Penner was 64, a retired long-haul trucker who'd run the prairies for 30 years, and, after a divorce and a stretch of bad luck, had lived 8 months in the sleeper cab of a rig parked behind a truck stop outside Headingley, before a church basement and a slow climb back. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. When he did say something, it landed, because it came without performance. He'd watched Beatrice sign checks for 2.5 years and skip every ribbon cutting that mattered, and he'd never said a word about it. He was waiting, though he couldn't have told you for what. He figured he'd know it when he saw it. The Winnipeg trip was supposed to be routine. Beatrice flew in to walk through a mixed-use development her company was finishing near the rail yards. 40 units of affordable housing over a grocery store, the kind of project that photographs well. Walter picked her up in the SUV and drove her out to the site, and she answered emails in the back and didn't look out the window once. They finished by 9:30. She wanted the hotel. Walter took Selkirk Avenue, and near a small church with a sign that read "Everyone Welcome," he said, "Need to top up the tank," and pulled into a gas bar across the street, and got out, and stood at the pump, not pumping, looking at something across the road. A Corolla sat alone in the church lot. Rust along the wheel wells. Windows fogged solid from the inside, every pane gone milk white. Walter knew that fog. He had breathed that exact fog onto the windows of a truck cab for 8 months. He knew what it meant, a person, or more than one, breathing inside a closed cold car for hours. He left the nozzle and crossed the street the way you approach something that might break. He stopped beside the driver's window and raised his hand and knocked. Twice. Gently. The shape inside flinched hard, an arm flying back toward the seats behind it, putting itself between the window and whatever it was protecting. Walter stepped back a full pace and held both gloved hands up, open, plain. A man who'd been afraid in a parked car knew how to look unfrightening to someone else who was. A circle appeared in the fog where a sleeve had wiped it. A face. Red-rimmed eyes, exhausted but wide awake. The window cracked an inch. "We're not bothering anybody," Reuben said, the sentence coming out automatic, the same words he'd given the security guard. "We'll be gone in the morning." Walter didn't move. How long? Not soft, quiet. "We're fine." "I didn't ask if you're fine, I asked how long." Behind the man, in the dark, something small shifted under a blanket. The engine ticked as it cooled. 9 nights, Reuben said. Walter looked at him for a moment, then looked at the shapes in the back. He couldn't see them clearly, but he could count, and one of them was very small. He nodded once and walked back across the road, and Reuben watched him go and felt the old familiar settling in his chest. People looked. People asked. People walked away. That was the pattern. Walter opened the back door of the SUV. Beatrice was on her phone, blue light on her face. "There's a man in that car across the street," Walter said. "Care home scrubs, 2 kids. He's been out there 9 nights. Her thumb stopped moving. She didn't look up right away, the way a body goes still when it hears something it wasn't ready for. "What do you want me to do about it?" she said finally. The question wasn't cold. It was the question of a woman who had been avoiding exactly this for 2.5 years and knew it. "I don't want you to do anything," Walter said. "I'm telling you what's there." He shut the door and went back to the pump. Beatrice sat in the warm SUV and looked across the road at the white-windowed Corolla, and her chest did something. Not pain, exactly, but pressure, the feeling of water leaning on a dam. She thought about a half-ton truck in a farmyard. Just for a little while, Bea. Just till the spring. It hadn't been just till the spring. She thought about Rosalind, who would already be across that road, who would have knocked before Walter did. She opened her own door. The cold took her breath. Her good wool coat meant nothing against it. She crossed the street and stood where Walter had stood, and she didn't reach for her wallet or say her own name, or any of the things people with money say to people without it. She said the only thing that felt true enough to offer a stranger in a freezing car. "My mother cleaned houses in Brandon," she said when the inch of window opened again. "There was a winter we slept in a truck. I was 12. She told me it was just for a little while." She paused, and the cold seemed to pull the next part out of her. "It wasn't just for a little while." Reuben stared at her. Whatever he'd been braced to hear, it wasn't that. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. "Because I heard you've been out here 9 nights, Beatrice said. "And I know what the 10th one feels like, when you can't picture the 11th. She held out a card at the edge of the window. "Heavy stock, a phone number. There's a room booked tonight at the Holiday Inn on Pembina. 2 beds. It's paid. Your name's at the desk. Just give me your name. Take your kids somewhere warm. Sleep horizontal. In the morning if you want, we talk. If you don't want to, throw the card out and you'll never see me again. No conditions." Reuben looked at the card, and at her, and at the back seat where 2 small shapes were curled together under a blanket that was not enough for a Manitoba January. "How do I know this isn't a trick?" he said. "Not hostile, just tired." "You don't," she said. "I'm a stranger. You've got every reason not to trust me. All I can tell you is that 46 years ago, nobody knocked on my mother's window. I'm knocking on yours." Then from the back, Joel coughed. A small wet rattle, the kind that starts small in a chest that's breathed cold air too long and doesn't stay small. Reuben's hand moved on its own. He took the card. His fingers were stiff with cold, and when they brushed Beatrice's hand, she felt the chill in them like a charge against every warm building she had ever owned. "My kids come first," he said. It wasn't really to her. It was to himself. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm standing here." He gave her his name. She walked back to the SUV and watched the Corolla's taillights pull carefully out of the lot and turn south, slow as a man carrying something that might spill. Walter got in beside her and didn't start the engine. After a while he said, without looking in the mirror, "Rosalind would have knocked first." Beatrice closed her eyes. She would have. The room at the Holiday Inn was nothing remarkable. 2 queen beds, white sheets, a heater humming under the window, a tub, soap in little wrapped bars, a lamp that gave a warm yellow light instead of the sodium glare of a parking lot. Reuben stood in the doorway and couldn't make himself walk in. Imani went first. She touched a bed like it might vanish. Then she found the bathroom and said, "Dad, there's a real tub," with a wonder that nearly took his knees out. Because for a girl who'd been washing her face with cold water in a Tim Hortons washroom for 9 days, a bathtub was a small miracle. Joel climbed onto the nearest mattress and sank into it and was asleep in under a minute, faster than he'd slept since the apartment, because the surface under him was a bed, an actual bed, the kind of thing most people never have to think about. Imani didn't get into the bed. She sat down on the floor with her back against it, knees up, and she cried, not loud, the way she did everything, but 2 quiet lines down her face and her shoulders shaking, 9 days of being brave finally finding a room safe enough to fall apart in. Reuben sat down beside her on the floor. He didn't tell her it was okay. He didn't tell her to stop. He put his arm around her and pulled her in and held her the way he'd wanted to for 9 nights and couldn't. Because holding her would have meant admitting they needed holding. And admitting that would have ended the story he'd been telling them both. The story was over now. That was all right. 12 blocks away, in a hotel she half-owned, Beatrice Lindqvist sat on the edge of her bed after Walter texted that the kids were inside and warm, and for the first time in 2.5 years she cried the kind of crying she'd taught herself never to do. The kind that starts low in your stomach and comes out as a sound you don't recognize. She wasn't crying for the man in the scrubs or his children. She was crying for Rosalind, who would have crossed that road first, who would have sat on that motel floor with that little girl and known exactly what to say. For 2.5 years of building things with her daughter's name on them and running from every door. Mom, you don't have to fix it. You just have to show up. She'd shown up tonight, and it had cracked her open in precisely the way she'd been afraid of for 2.5 years. But cracked open, she was beginning to understand, was not the same as broken. She came to the room at 9 the next morning with 2 coffees and a paper bag from a bakery on Corridon, muffins, and a chocolate chip cookie the size of a side plate that she'd chosen on a hunch about what would amaze a 5-year-old. Joel held it with both hands like it was a trophy. Reuben opened the door in the same scrubs, washed in the sink and dried over the heater overnight, wrinkled and clean. His face was different, not transformed, just straighter, the posture of a man who had slept lying down for the first time in over a week. They sat at the little table by the window, and Beatrice didn't lead with a plan. She led with a question. Tell me what happened. He told her. The renoviction, the wait lists, the $18.40 an hour, the $410, the strip mall, the security guard, the church lot, the dead battery, the gas or supper night. He told it plainly, in order, the way you chart a patient's decline. And then he said the thing that the people who watch this story later would write down and send to one another. You want to know the worst part? It's not the cold. It's that I did everything right. I went to work every day. I raised my kids. I never missed a shift. I just stopped earning enough to keep a roof, and somehow that's enough to end up in a parking lot in January. You start thinking you missed something. That if you'd been smarter, saved more, this wouldn't have happened. And you know that's not true. But knowing it and feeling it are 2 different things. Beatrice didn't say I understand, and she didn't say it's not your fault, because those were things people said to feel better about somebody else's pain. She said, my mother told me the same thing, almost word for word. She said the hardest part of that truck wasn't the cold. It was that some nights she believed we deserved to be in it. For a moment something passed between them that wasn't charity and wasn't gratitude, just recognition. 2 people who'd lived in the same room 46 years apart. I'm not going to offer you money, Beatrice said. You don't need saving. You've been saving these kids every single day. What you need is a floor to stand on. So here's what I can do. 90 days. A unit in one of the buildings my company manages here in the city. Subsidized, not free. Licensed childcare through a center we partner with so your son isn't sitting in a library while you work. And time. You're a PSW. There's a bridging program at Red River. You do it, you write the exam, you're a licensed practical nurse making $29.30 an hour with benefits. You're already most of the way there. You just need ground under you long enough to finish. She looked at him. I'm not handing you a new life, Reuben. I'm handing you 90 days to build one. What you do with it is yours. He stared at her. Why me, he said. There are people sleeping in cars all over this city right now. Beatrice looked at Joel, chocolate on his fingers, drawing on the hotel notepad. At Imani, watching from the bed, measuring. Because my mother was you, she said. Same kind of job, same kind of car. Same arithmetic that didn't add up, and nobody came. She got us out on her own, but it cost years, her years, and a piece of my childhood that never came back. She paused. And because my daughter would already be sitting where I'm sitting, saying exactly what I'm saying. She's not here to do it, so I'm doing it for her. Reuben looked down at his coffee, and the tears came and dripped onto the table, and he didn't wipe them, because for the first time in 9 days he was in a room where crying was allowed. "They come first," he said. "Whatever this is, they always come first." "I know," Beatrice said. "That's exactly why I'm here." The apartment was on the second floor of a building called Riverbend Court, off Henderson Highway. 2 bedrooms, laminate floors, a kitchen with a working stove, and a fridge that hummed and cupboards that were empty and waiting. The carpet was builder grade, and the light fixtures were the standard domes you find in every affordable unit in every city in the country. But the front door locked. Heat came out of the vents. The walls did not move. Imani walked to the door of the smaller bedroom and stood there with one hand on the frame, looking at an empty room with a window and a closet and nothing else. And she said, "This one's mine?" And when her father said yours, she went in and put her palm flat on the wall as if checking it was real. And then she closed the door. Not a slam, a careful, deliberate click, the sound of a child choosing privacy for the first time in her life. Reuben heard her crying through the door, small and quiet, and he put his hand on the knob, and then he took it off and stepped back, and he let her have the one thing she had never had, which was a door that closed, and a place to feel something with nobody watching. He stood in the hall with his hand over his mouth, because an 11-year-old should not have to be brave every second of every day, and now, finally, she didn't. He enrolled in the bridging program that week. Days at Riverwood, 3 evenings a week in class, clinical placements on weekends. He fell asleep at the kitchen table over his textbook twice in the first week, and both times woke up with a blanket over his shoulders he hadn't put there. Imani, of course. Walter drove the kids to school and the childcare center every morning in the SUV without being asked, and didn't ask the kids any questions, and the kids didn't explain, and somewhere in the silence between need and dignity, a routine built itself. Beatrice visited once that first month. She brought a book about the ocean for Joel and, for Imani, a gift card to McNally Robinson, because Imani was the kind of kid who'd rather choose her own book than be handed one. Joel gave Beatrice a drawing before she left. 4 figures in front of a square house, a tall man, a girl with stars in her hair, a small boy, and off to one side a woman in a long coat, with "My Family" and the coat lady printed across the top. Beatrice folded it carefully and put it in her pocket and walked to the SUV and sat in the back and did not move for 10 minutes. Walter didn't start the engine and didn't look in the mirror because he knew. The drawing had 4 figures and a 5th standing slightly apart, and the space where Rosalind should have been knelt down beside that girl, adding more stars. If this is reaching you, and the people who told this story later said it reached a great many, it might be worth sitting with the fact that the woman in that car was, statistically, not unusual at all. By some estimates, more than 1 in 10 Canadians has lived through some form of hidden homelessness, couch surfing, a car, a relative's floor. The kind that never shows up in a head count because it never reaches a shelter door. 6 weeks in, Reuben was near the top of his cohort, and one Tuesday he came home and found a young woman sitting on the stairwell floor outside a unit on the first level. Maybe 26. 2 kids, a boy of about 4 holding a stuffed dog with one ear gone, a baby asleep in a car seat on the floor beside her. Her eyes were dry in the way that means the crying is already finished. Reuben knew that look. He'd worn it through a fogged window 7 weeks before. He crouched down. "You okay?" She startled, guarded. "We're fine," she said. He almost smiled. "I didn't ask if you're fine," he said gently. "I asked your name." "Daniela," she said. "Daniela Reyes." He sat down on the floor beside her. Back against the wall, 2 strangers on cheap carpet in a building, meant for people who'd run out of other doors. She'd been evicted, she said. She'd been spending nights in the waiting room at the Health Sciences Center, because they let you sit in the chairs if you didn't make trouble. That night, Reuben cooked jollof rice and a pot of beans, the food of people who know how to stretch $1 over 4 plates, and carried it downstairs with a towel around the handle. Daniela ate slowly, like she'd forgotten food could be warm, Her son ate fast, the way kids eat when they're not sure when the next meal comes. Over the next 2 weeks, Reuben did what nobody asked him to. He cooked extra 3 nights a week and brought it down. He phoned Walter and asked, carefully, whether there was room in the childcare arrangement for 2 more, and Walter made the call himself without checking with anyone. And on Sunday evenings, the one night Reuben didn't work and didn't have class, he sat at Daniela's table and helped her through the forms, EIA and rent assist, and the housing application. The same forms that had told him waitlist, waitlist, waitlist. Except now there was someone beside her, pointing at the right boxes, translating the language of a system that seemed designed to exhaust you before it helped you. Beatrice found out through Walter, who told the truth when she asked how Reuben was doing. She drove out the next weekend and sat across from him at his kitchen table, while Joel napped and Amani read in her room with the door shut. "You barely have enough for your own," she said. "Why give it away?" Reuben didn't hesitate. "Because 7 weeks ago I was her," he said, "and somebody knocked on my window. You want to know the difference between charity and what Walter did that night? Charity is giving something you won't miss. Walter gave me something that cost him nothing and meant everything. He let me know I wasn't invisible. That a stranger could look at a fogged-up window in the cold and decide I was worth a knock. He looked at the drawing on his fridge, 4 figures and a coat. Her kids aren't different from mine. They're stuck in the same system I was stuck in. I can't sit upstairs warm and pretend I don't hear the same sound coming up through the floor." Beatrice sat with that a long time. 2 days later she flew back, and she didn't go to her office and she didn't go to her hotel. She told Walter to take her to the resource center on Ellis Avenue with her daughter's name in gold over the door. He pulled to the curb and left the engine running. "You want company?" he said. "No," she said. She pressed the buzzer. A tired, warm voice asked if she needed help. "My name is Beatrice Lindqvist," she said. "I'd like to come in." The door buzzed open. The lobby smelled of floor cleaner and cooked food, and the particular warmth of a building that runs all day for people who've been cold too long. On the wall behind the desk hung a framed photograph. Rosalind, in scrubs, that smile, and below it a small brass plate that read in loving memory of Rosalind Lindqvist, who sat with people on their worst days. Beatrice stood in front of it and did not move. The director, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, came and stood beside her and said, "We always hoped you'd come." "I should have come a long time ago," Beatrice said. The director didn't argue. She pointed to a worn rug in the corner by a bookshelf. "Your daughter sat right there every Thursday, brought her own picture books. The kids lined up. She did all the voices." She paused. "There's a little girl, 7 now, who still asks when Miss Rosalind is coming back." Beatrice walked to the small chair by the rug and sat down in it, her knees up too high, and she stayed there 20 minutes while the building hummed around her, and she said very quietly, to no one and to her daughter, "I'm here. Sweetheart, I'm sorry it took me so long. It wasn't closure. She didn't believe in that. It was arrival. 2.5 years of running, and then a too small chair in a building that smelled like floor cleaner, and the simple act of staying." Reuben wrote the Canadian Practical Nurse Registration Examination on a Thursday in late winter and passed it. He read the result 3 times. 12 weeks of evenings, of clinical placements, stacked on top of double shifts, of flashcards he'd made by hand at the kitchen table after the kids were down, of turning pages while his eyes blurred because turning the page was the only thing standing between $18.40 and $30 an hour. He walked out into the parking lot where the old Corolla still sat. He'd kept it, not because he needed it, but because he needed to remember. And he got in the driver's seat and didn't start the engine and looked at the back seat where the blankets used to be, and he said, out loud, to no one, "We made it." To the man he'd been 9 nights in. To Adeze. To Amani, holding a flashlight at -31. to Joel, who laughed at his own hiccups, because he didn't yet know the world could be hard. That Monday he started as a licensed practical nurse at the Health Sciences Center. $29 an hour. Full benefits for himself and 2 dependents. A day shift that had him home before the kids got off the bus. For the first time in his life, he had dental coverage for his children. For the first time, Joel's cough meant a clinic visit and a prescription, and not a calculation. In the 4th month, he paid the rent himself, full amount, no subsidy, his name on the lease and on the mailbox, and on the hydro bill that came every month like proof that he existed in a system that had once acted like he didn't. Beatrice called when she heard he'd turned down the rest of the support. She wasn't surprised. "The offer stands as long as you need it," she said. "You gave me 90 days, Reuben said. I'll take the rest myself." There was a silence on the line that wasn't awkward. "The 90 days was never about the apartment," she said finally. "It was about you believing you deserved a floor to stand on." "I'm standing," he said. One winter later, Imani made the ringette team at her school and turned out to play like a kid who'd spent her whole life watching everyone else and reading the ice a half second before anyone moved. Her last name went across the back of the jersey in white block letters, and the first time she pulled it on, she stood still for a moment and touched the letters, because it said she was part of something with her name on it. Joel started kindergarten and clung to his father's leg at the classroom door until Reuben knelt down and took his face in both hands and said, "Dad will be right here when you come back." Dad always comes back, and the boy studied his face for the truth the way 5-year-olds do, and let go and walked in without looking back, and Reuben stood in the hallway and pressed his back to the wall and breathed. 3 floors below, Daniela Reyes had her own lease now and was enrolled in the PSW course at Red River, studying at her kitchen table with cold coffee and the same stubborn determination of a woman who'd been given a chance and refused to waste it. Walter still knocked on the door now and then to drop something off. The chain hadn't stopped. Walter had knocked on a window. Reuben had knocked on a stairwell. Daniela would knock on someone's door eventually. That's how it works. Kindness doesn't run out when you spend it. It compounds. On a Tuesday morning in February, Reuben drove to the hospital before dawn. The streetlights still on, the radio low. He took Selkirk Avenue, past the gas bar, past the little church with the sign that read "Everyone Welcome," and in the lot a single car sat alone, an old sedan with its windows fogged white from the inside, the kind of fog that only forms when people have been breathing in a closed, cold space for hours. He slowed. He pulled over. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, and then he stepped out into the dark and the squeaking snow in his clean scrubs with his badge clipped to his chest. Reuben Mensah, LPN, and he walked across the lot and stood beside the driver's window, where he could see the shapes through the fog and hear the breathing, and he raised his hand and he knocked. Nobody saved Reuben. Beatrice didn't, and Walter didn't, and the system certainly didn't. He saved himself every single day for 9 nights and the year that followed. What the 2 of them gave him wasn't a home or a check. It was 90 days of believing he was worth solid ground, and what he gave back couldn't be bought at any price. Proof that a knock on a window doesn't end with the person who hears it. It moves, it remembers, it finds the next fogged-up car on the next cold morning, and it knocks. What stays with me about Reuben Mensah isn't the cold, or the dead battery, or the church lot with its hand-painted sign. It's that he kept clocking in at 6:45 to be gentle with people who'd forgotten his name, on mornings when no one had been gentle with him for 9 nights running. Nothing forced him to keep his hands warm before he touched Mrs. Iverson's. Nobody was watching. He did it because that was simply who he'd decided to be, and he wasn't willing to let a parking lot rewrite that. And here's the part I keep turning over. It was exactly that quiet decency, The kind that costs you something and earns you nothing, that made Walter Penner cross a road at -31. People talk about luck. I think Reuben built the conditions for his own. The man you are when no one is looking is the man a stranger eventually decides is worth a knock. But being good wasn't enough on its own, and I want to be honest about that. Plenty of decent people stay stuck. What moved Reuben forward was that he thought clearly when his whole body was screaming to just survive the night. When Beatrice offered him a floor to stand on, he didn't grab at quick cash. He saw the real lever. A credential, 12 weeks of bridging, the difference between $18 an hour and $30. And he reached for the thing that would still be paying off years later. Anybody can want a better life. It takes a cooler head than most of us have at our lowest to recognize the one door that actually leads somewhere and walk through it instead of the door that just feels good tonight. And then there's the part nobody sees in the highlight reel. The flashcards at the kitchen table after a double shift. The textbook he turned the page on when his eyes wouldn't focus, because turning the page was the only thing standing between him and the life he wanted for Amani and Joel. That kind of plain stubbornness isn't glamorous. It's just one more page, one more night, one more shift, repeated until the math finally changes. I think that's the whole recipe if there is one. Hold on to the kind of person you are, even when the world gives you every excuse to put it down. Keep your head clear enough to tell the difference between what's easy and what's worth it, and then outlast the part of the road that wants you to quit. Reuben did all three, and the proof wasn't the apartment or the title on his badge. The proof was the morning he saw a fogged-up window in that same church lot, pulled over and knocked. That's where it ends and where it starts again.